Work and learn. Meet Light Meet Max. සක්‍රිය කර ගැනීමට MySLT app එකට log වෙන්න. Work and learn. Meet Light Meet Max. සක්‍රිය කර ගැනීමට MySLT app එකට log වෙන්න.
ගෑස් ඕනේ නෑ. පියුරිට් එකට අදම මාරු වෙන්න.
Tonight, allocations. Cabinet grants approval to present the appropriation bill for the year 2023 in Parliament. Tax concession. The COPF grants approval to provide a tax concession of 17 years for the overseas private limited company, reversing its original decision after BOI fails to provide figures on taxable income. Relief. Prices of cooking gas expected to reduce further with effect from midnight tomorrow. Repercussions. COPF chairman suggests officials involved in coal procurement process be suspended for 1 year. All this and much more coming up tonight on First at 9, this Tuesday the 4th of October 2022.
From AdaDerana, this is AdaDerana First at 9. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
Good evening and welcome to AdaDerana 24's English News. I'm Andrew Bernard. Now, the Cabinet granted approval for President Ranil Wickremesinghe to table in Parliament the appropriation bill for 2023 as a Minister of Finance. According to the appropriation bill, the government is expected to incur an expenditure of over 7.9 billion rupees. Speaking at the Cabinet media briefing today, meanwhile, Cabinet co-spokesperson Dr. Bandula Gunawardena said the government will only be able to recover part of its recurrent expenditure estimated at 4,634 billion rupees, marking a total of 2,500 billion rupees unrecoverable through tax and non-tax revenues. Following the conclusion of yesterday's cabinet meeting, the cabinet gave the green light to a host of proposals that had been presented by the relevant ministers. Among the proposals approved by the cabinet of ministers was to present the draft appropriation bill for the year 2023 to the parliament. Accordingly, the total recurrent expenditure for the year 2023 has been estimated as 4,634 billion rupees, while total capital expenditure has been estimated at 3,245 billion rupees. President Ranil Wickremesinghe will present the appropriation bill for 2023 in Parliament in his capacity as the Minister of Finance.
2023 වර්ෂයේදී මුළු රාජ්‍ය වියදම බිලියන 7,929යි. එතකොට 2023 අයවැය යෝජනාවල කුමන ආකාරයට බදු ගැලපීම් කළත් අපිට මේ දරණ පුනරාවර්තන වියදමින් අඩක් පමණ තමයි ආදායම් ඇස්තමේන්තුව හැදුවට පස්සේ බදුවා බදු නොවන ආකාරයට උපය ගන්න පුළුවන් වුණොත් බිලියන 2,500ක්. එදිනෙදා වියදම දරන්න බෑ.
Further, the cabinet gave the green light for the establishment of a food policy committee proposed by President Ranil Wickremesinghe. The committee will comprise heads of relevant institutions and chaired by the secretary to the president in order to build trust among producers, traders as well as customers on monitoring supply chain within the country as well as short-term issues prevailing with regard to supply and prices. The cabinet also gave the go-ahead for the government to take appropriate steps to provide a wholesome lunch to another 1 million school students. The government spends 4 billion rupees as part of its annual school lunch program that is aimed at 1.8 million school children in 7,926 schools. The approval granted yesterday extends the school lunch program, allowing the allocation of 4 billion rupees more for the program. Speaking during today's media briefing, Cabinet spokesperson Dr. Bandula Gunawardena said today that the program will ensure food security for at least 51% of students. Meanwhile, approval was also granted to amend the age of retirement for employees in state-owned enterprises to 60 years. Accordingly, the proposal submitted by President Ranil Wickremesinghe in order to issue a circular in this regard, with effect from the 1st of January 2023, with the new revised age limit, was approved by the Cabinet of Ministers. Now, the Committee on Public Finance granted approval today to provide a tax concession of 17 years for the overseas private limited company that is investing in Sri Lanka after the Board of Investment had presented figures on the level of income expected to be generated during the period of tax concession against the taxable income expected to be lost during that period. Initially, the committee refused to approve the order enacted under the provisions of the Strategic Development Project Act due to the failure of the Board of Investment to provide proper analysis when they were summoned before the committee yesterday. On the 20th of September, an order published under the Gazette number 2291/25 enacted by the President as the Ministry of Finance, Economic Stabilization and National Policies as per the provisions of the Strategic Development Projects Act number 14 of 2008, provide a 17-year tax concession to an overseas private limited company to invest in Sri Lanka, was presented to the Parliament. As per the order, the relevant company will be exempted from corporate income tax for 12 years from the date the order is placed before the Parliament. After the expiry of the 12-year period, the company will have to pay 50% of the corporate income tax rate prevailing at the time for a period of 5 years. Prior to the order being debated in Parliament this morning, the matter was taken into discussion when the Board of Investment was summoned before the Committee on Public Finance in Parliament last evening.
Under the IMF agreement, as far as we know, that even export companies will be taxed at 30%. If that is coming, you already signed a staff level agreement. You are coming to us now and asking for 12 years tax holidays for a particular company. අපි කොමිටුව හැටියට අපිට ඔබතුමන්ලා ජස්ටිෆයි කරන්න ඕන. මේ ටැක්ස් බ්‍රේක් එක නිසා රජයට අහිමි වන බදු ප්‍රමාණය කොපමණද? දැන් ඕගොල්ලෝ BOI එකේ මේක ඇනලිසිස් එකක් කරලා ඇතිනේ. 10 මිලියන් ඉන්වෙස්ට් කරනවා ඩොලර්ස්. ඒකෙන් මෙච්චර රැකියා නිර්මාණය කරනවා. මෙච්චර ටර්නෝවර් එකක් තියෙනවා. මෙච්චර ප්‍රොෆිට් එකක් තියෙනවා. එතකොට 130ක් බද්දක් ගැහුවා නම් මෙච්චර ප්‍රමාණයක් ලැබෙන්න ඕන. ඒ ප්‍රමාණය කීයද අවුරුදු 12කට?
Well, I'm unable to answer that question. It's a good question. I understand that.
We will not do this. I am going to put my foot down. Hereafter, don't come here if you don't know the answer to a simple question.
Well,
ඔගොල්ලෝ ගාව මේකේ project proposal එක නැද්ද?
proposal එකක් තියෙනවා අපිට. ඒ original.
ඒ proposal එකේ අවුරුදු 12කට estimate කරලා තියෙන profit එක මොකක්ද?
සර් 12කට focus කරලා නැහැ සර්.
ඇයි එහෙනම් 12කට ඉල්ලන්නේ? ඇයි 17කට ඉල්ලන්නේ?
However, the order was approved by the Committee of Public Finance this morning after figures pertaining to the loss of taxable income during the tax concession period and the levels of income expected to be generated during the concession period were presented to them by the BOI. Later, the order was debated in Parliament today.
ක්‍රමෝපාය සංවර්ධන ව්‍යාපෘති පනතේ නියමයන් බුදුමල්ලා එකඟද? කිරියල්ල මැතිතුමා කියනවා එකඟයි කියලා.
අද අපි නැවතත් ඔවුන්ව කැඳවලා ඔවුන් අපිට කිව්වා ඩොලර් මිලියන 90ක පාඩුවක් රජයට දරා ගන්න සිද්ධ වෙනවා බදු සම්බන්ධයෙන්. හැබැයි ඩොලර් මිලියන 700ක ආදායමක් ඔවුන් මුළු රටේ සමස්ත දලදේශීය නිෂ්පාදනයට එකතු කරන්න අපේක්ෂා කරනවා කියලා. ඒ සම්බන්ධයෙන් සලකලා අපි කොන්දේසියක් සහිතව මේකට එකඟ වෙමු. කොන්දේසිය තමයි ඔබගේ මං ඉල්ලනවා මුදල් ඇමතිවරයාගෙන් රජයෙන් කරුණා කරලා මේක නැවත කල්පනා කරලා බලන්න. ඇයි අවුරුදු 17ක් බදු සහනයක් ආයතනයකට දෙන්න ඕන? අපි මේක නවත්තන්න කියනවා නෙමෙයි. අපිට ආයෝජන අවශ්‍යයි. ආයෝජන අවශ්‍ය නිසා අපි මේකට කොන්දේසි සහිතව ඒක දෙනවා.
ඒ වගේ මේ සමාගම අපි බලාපොරොත්තු වෙනවා ඔවුන්ට මේ සහනය ලබා දීම තුලින් අපිට තව දුරටත් මේ ආයෝජනය අපේ රට තුල වර්ධනය වේවි කියලා. ප්‍රශ්නයක් ඇහුවා රටේ අනිකුත් බදු විවිධාකාර විදිහට වැඩ කරද්දී අයි මේක විතරක් දේශ ආයෝජන අවශ්‍යතාවයක් අපේ රට තුල ඉතා බැරෑරුම් විදිහට පවතිනවා. ඒ වගේම තාක්ෂණ විෂය යටතේ වූ කර්මාන්තවලට අපි වඩාත් හොඳ තැනක් මේ අලුත් තරුණ ප්‍රජාවට වෙනුවෙන් ලබා දිය යුතුයි කියලා එතුමන්ලත් පිළිගන්නවා. ඒ නිසා අපි මේ අවස්ථාව ඒ ආයතනයට ලබා දුන්නා.
අවුරුදු 15ක් 20ක් අපි බදු සහන දිය යුතුද? මොකද්ද මේ ප්‍රතිපත්තිය? අපි රට වෙනුවෙන් අපි මේවා නෙගෝෂিয়েට් කරලා කරන්න බැරිද? මේකේ ක්‍රමවේදයක් තියෙන්න ඕනේ. නැත්නම් මේ වගේ බදු සහන නිකන් පිළිවෙලක් නැතුව දෙන්න ගියා නම් අන්තිමේට කොහෙන්ද අපි ආදායම උපයන්නේ?
I think that the Strategic Development Act is primarily flawed. Government revenue is absolutely important because it's through government revenue that we are actually able to create food security, also provide health and educational services to the public. Now, unfortunately, when we look at the history going back 40 years of providing tax incentives to foreign investment, it looks like it has not really worked out. It has really failed in terms of government revenue.
මේ රටේ ආර්ථිකය ඉතාම දුර්වල මට්ටමක ඉදී අවශ්‍ය විදේශ ආයෝජන ටික අරගෙන එන්න. ඒ වගේම ලෝකයට පණිවිඩයක් ගෙනියන්න අද ලංකාවට ජාත්‍යන්තර වශයෙන් පිළිගත්ත රටවල් ආයෝජනය කරනවා කියන පණිවිඩය අරගෙන ගිහිල්ලා අනික් අයට ආරාධනා කරන්න මේ සියල්ල සඳහා මේ බදු සහන අපි ලබා දීම සිදු කළා තියෙනවා.
Now, the Auditor General's Department had announced that the coal procurement process that had been followed when awarding the tender to the Black Sands Company had not been in line with the government's tender procurement procedure guidelines. As such, the chairman of the Committee on Public Finance, Dr. Harsha De Silva, stated that the COPF had recommended for all the officials involved in the coal procurement procedure to be suspended for at least 1 year. However, Minister of Power and Energy Kanchana Wijesekara urged the COPF to hear what the officials involved in the process had to say on behalf of their side. Chairman of the Committee on Public Finance, Dr. Harsha De Silva, presented the audit report regarding the evaluation of the procurement process for the purchase of coal for the period of 2022 to 2025 for the Lakvijay coal power plant in Noracholai. The report was compiled by the Auditor General's Department following a request made by the COPF chairman after tender number LCC/22/TT/1, which was awarded to a company for the supply of coal, did not see fruition after the company refused to supply the coal. According to the observations made by the Auditor General in the report, the coal procurement process had not been carried out in accordance with the government's approved procurement process guidelines. The report further stated that the objective of giving a fair and equal opportunity to participate in the procurement process to interested parties has been violated. The Auditor General recommended to confirm whether all the parties involved in the coal procurement process are fulfilling their responsibilities correctly in accordance with the government's approved procurement guidelines and emphasized the need to take appropriate action against parties who deviate from the prescribed process.
Black Sands කියන ආයතනයට මේ ටෙන්ඩරය ලබා දීලා තිබුණා. ගැටලුවක් වෙලා තිබුණේ මේ Black Sands කියන කම්පැනිය ලියාපදිංචි වෙලා තිබිච්ච කම්පැනියක් නොමෙයි. එතකොට කොහොමද ලියාපදිංචි නොවෙච්ච ආයතනයකට ටෙන්ඩර් එක ලබා දුන්නේ? විගණකපාතිවරයාගේ වාර්තාව අනුව මෙම ගල් අඟුරු ප්‍රසම්පාදන ක්‍රියාවලිය රජයේ අනුමත ප්‍රසම්පාදන මාර්ගෝපදේශයන්ට අනුකූල නොවන බව මූලික වශයෙන් නිරීක්ෂණය වී ඇත. කැබිනට් මණ්ඩලය විසින් දැනටමත් ටෙන්ඩරය අවලංගු කර ඇති අතර යථෝක්ත කරුණ සම්බන්ධයෙන් විගණකාධිපතිවරයාගේ නිර්දේශවලට අමතරව කාරක සභාව විසින් 22 ඔක්තෝබර් 3 වෙනි දින පහත සඳහන් නිර්දේශ ඉදිරිපත් කරන ලදී. මෙම ප්‍රසම්පාදන කමිටුවේ සමාජික නිලධාරීන් හට නැවත ප්‍රසම්පාදන කටයුතු සඳහා සහභාගී වීම අවම වශයෙන් වසරක කාලයකට හෝ අත්හිටවිය යුතුයි. ඒ නිසා අපි ජනාධිපතිවරයාට මුදල් අමාත්‍යාංශයට සහ රජයට කියනවා මේ අවස්ථාවේදී මේ සම්බන්ධයෙන් ඔබලා අපේ නිර්දේශ ක්‍රියාත්මක කරන්න.
මම විශ්වාස කරනවා මගේ අමාත්‍යාංශ ලේකම්වරයා ඇතුළේ කණ්ඩායම අවංකව වැඩ කරපු නිලධාරීන් හැටියට ඉතාමත්ම අභියෝගාත්මක අවස්ථාවකදී ඔබතුමන්ලා එවැනි නිර්දේශයක් ලබා දීමට පෙර මම ඔබෙන් ඉල්ලීමක් කරනවා විශේෂයෙන්ම ඒ ප්‍රසම්පාදන කටයුත්තට දායක වෙච්ච නිලධාරීන්ටත් ඇහුම්කම් දීමක් මුදල් කාර්ය සභාව සිදු කළ යුතුයි කියලා. මොකද ඒකපාර්ශ්වික තීන්දුවක් ලබා දෙනවා වෙනුවට ඒ වගේම විගණාධිපතිවරයා ලබා දීපු තොරතුරු වලට පිළිතුරු ලිපියක් ලබා දීලා තියෙනවා ඒ ප්‍රසම්පාදන කමිටුවේ සහභාගී වෙච්ච නිලධාරීන්. ඒ තොරතුරු වාර්තාවත් මුදල් කාර්ය සභාවේ නිලධාරීන්ට ලබා දෙන්න කටයුතු කරොත් සුදුසුයි කියන එක මම විශ්වාස කරනවා.
හැබැයි අපි මේ නිර්දේශ දීලා තියෙන්නේ මේ රටේ විගණකාධිපතිවරයාගේ නිර්දේශ වලට අනුව. ඔහුගේ නිර්දේශය කෙලින්ම කියන්නේ බැහැර වන පාර්ශ්වයන්ට එරෙහි සුදුසු ඉදිරි පියවර ගැනීමේ අවශ්‍යතාවය අවධාරණය කරේ.
Now, Dr. Harsha De Silva has announced that he will step down as a member of the Committee on Public Enterprises to pave way for independent parliamentarian Professor Charitha Herath to enter into the committee. Dr. Harsha De Silva's resignation from COPE was announced in Parliament today by opposition leader Sajith Premadasa. Yesterday, the Speaker of Parliament released a list of 27 parliamentarians who will be members of the COPE committee. However, a notable exclusion from the list of nominations was Professor Charitha Herath, who served as the former chairman of the COPE committee. Professor Herath mentioned that it was against the parliamentary tradition to exclude the former chairman from the membership of the committee. Stay with us for more news after this short break.
අයිනෝ පුතා හැබැයි යා ගෙදර නිදියන්නෙම අමෝතු තැනක.
කාලගුණය කොහොමුණත් රයිනෝ නං වහලට සේෆ් තමයි මුළු ගෙදරම. Rhino Cement Roofing Sheets. Then you know Rhino. I know.
Big 3.
Uber Eats මගින් ඉදිරිපත් කරන ආදරයෙන් අවශ්‍යතා ඇතියට අත්‍යවශ්‍ය භාණ්ඩ පරිත්‍යාග කිරීමට වේදිකාවක්.
Welcome back. Now, following the reduction of the special commodity levy on imported sugar from 50 rupees to 25 cents, the Sri Lankan government has lost over 16 billion rupees in tax revenue from October 2020 to February 2021. According to a special audit report released by the National Audit Office, the benefit intended for the consumers was instead exploited by the importers and traders.
The National Audit Office recently released the special audit report on the expected relief provided to the consumers from the reduction of the special commodity levy on 1 kilogram of sugar from 50 rupees to 25 cents. Following this tax reduction, the government had been deprived of approximately 16.7 billion rupees in tax revenue by February 2021. During this period, Lanka Satasa had sold sugar bought from the private sector importers on occasion, which resulted in a loss of approximately 102 million rupees until the 8th of February 2021, when the price ceiling was removed. According to the special audit report, the importers and traders have paved the way for themselves to have a great economic advantage through the reduction of the taxes on sugar by the government, casting aside the need to pass on the benefit to the consumers. It was also observed by the special report that the sugar importation of Pyramid Wilma Private Limited had increased by 1,222% during the period from October 2020 to February 2021 in comparison with competing importers. The report recommended focusing on the possibility of recovering the tax revenue foregone by the government by correctly identifying the parties who retained the benefit without passing it on to the consumers.
Now, Litrogas Lanka Limited, one of the primary suppliers of domestic LP gas in the country, has decided to reduce prices of domestic LP gas cylinders with effect from midnight tomorrow. According to the chairman of Litrogas Lanka Limited, Mudita Piris, the decision was taken following the reduction in prices of the world market and according to the new gas price formula introduced by the company.
Litrogas Lanka Limited has announced that they expect to reduce the price of a 12.5 kilogram domestic gas cylinder by 200 to 300 rupees. According to Litro chairman Mudita Piris, the prices of other domestic LP gas cylinders will also be slashed proportionately.
As Litro Gas will be reducing the price effective from midnight tomorrow, and the official announcement in regard to the price reduction will be announced tomorrow morning 10:30. Based on the world gas prices, Litro Gas, we have decided to reduce the price effective from midnight tomorrow. With the price formula, Litro also making a very reasonable profit. Whatever the benefit we get in regard to the world gas price drop, we will always give the benefit to the people.
Now, the President's meeting announced today that the President of Iceland, Gudni Johansson, has assured to strengthen the bond of friendship between Sri Lanka and Iceland. The Icelandic head of state also congratulated Ranil Wickremesinghe on his election as the President of Sri Lanka. He also expressed confidence that the people of Sri Lanka will successfully deal with the economic challenges while preserving the social harmony which must be quintessential to Sri Lanka. President Johansson expressed that people enjoy good relations and there is no doubt that increasing the exchange could be considerable benefit to both Sri Lanka and Iceland. He assured his support to strengthen further the bond of friendship between the two countries and wished the government and the people of Sri Lanka good fortune in the future. Welcome back. Now, Sri Lankan shares registered their worst session late April today as industrial, financial and energy stocks pulled down the market for the fourth straight day. The all share price index bucked a broader rally in global equities to close down 4.28% at 9,237.05, its lowest since the 1st of September. The benchmark S&P SL20 index fell as much as 5% earlier in the day, triggering a temporary trading halt. Conglomerate Expo Lanka Holdings PLC and Lanka IOC weighed the most on the index, tumbling 8.8% rather and 12.2% respectively. Trading volume on the all-share index rose to 188.2 million shares on Tuesday from 125.4 million in the previous session. The market turnover, meanwhile, was 4.54 billion Sri Lankan rupees, well above the 2.54 billion rupees in the previous session. Foreign investors were net buyers in the equity market, purchasing 62.6 million rupees worth of shares, while domestic investors were net sellers, offloading 4.50 billion rupees worth of stocks. Now, IMF chief Kristalina Georgieva says several countries would fall into recession in the near future. However, she maintains that a global recession can be avoided if governments' fiscal policies were consistent with monetary policy tightening.
IMF chief Kristalina Georgieva's remarks come at a very economically turbulent time, with certain governments employing fiscal policy strategies which go against monetary policy objectives of central banks amidst fears of global recession.
We do need central banks to act decisively because inflation is very stubborn. We see now secondary impact of energy and food prices into core inflation in many countries. And if it is not stopped in its steps, it is bad for growth and it is very bad for poor people. Inflation is a tax on the poor.
She added fiscal policies that indiscriminately support everybody by suppressing energy prices and providing subsidies are working against monetary policy purposes.
So you have monetary policy putting a foot on the brakes and fiscal policy putting a foot on the accelerator. We are likely to see an impact on unemployment going up, and that would be the time for the Fed to say, we have done our job, we can ease in the future. We are not there yet.
Governments across the globe have stepped in to support their populations amid high food inflation and shortages by following the US Federal Reserve's interest rate hikes, sending shockwaves through financial markets and the economy. Earlier yesterday, the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development warned of serious consequences of a monetary policy-induced global recession for developing countries. It called for a new strategy including corporate windfall taxes, supply-side efforts, and regulation on commodity speculation. Georgieva called on the Fed to be extremely prudent in its policies and be mindful of the spillover impact on the rest of the world, adding its responsibility is very high. The IMF on Friday approved a new food shock borrowing window under its existing emergency financing instruments to help vulnerable countries cope with the food shortages and high costs stemming from inflation exacerbated by Russia's war in Ukraine.
The foreigners resumed selling in Asian equities, excluding Chinese stocks, as investors were deterred by US interest rate hikes, a firmer greenback, and a weaker regional growth outlook. Data from stock exchanges in South Korea, India, Taiwan, the Philippines, Vietnam, Indonesia, and Thailand showed that foreigners sold equities worth a net $8.83 billion last month, their first monthly selling since June.
The regional equities have so far faced total outflows of $69.7 billion in the first 3 quarters of the year, a massive jump in outflows of $47.63 billion faced in 2008 when the global financial crisis occurred. Last month, the US Federal Reserve raised its benchmark interest rate by 75 basis points, marking the third such hike in a row. Analysts expect the US Central Bank to keep hiking rates to tame rising inflationary pressures. The region is currently grappling with mounting inflationary pressures, interest rate hikes, and slowing economic growth. Outflows from tech-reliant South Korea and Taiwan last month jumped to a 3-month high of $1.8 billion and $5.3 billion respectively. India and Thailand witnessed outflows of $903 million and $653 million respectively, after each seeing inflows in the previous 2 months. Foreigners were also net sellers of equities in the Philippines and Vietnam markets last month. On the other hand, Indonesian equities gained small inflows of $209 million. However, Sri Lanka recorded a month-to-date net foreign inflow at $182,155, while the year-to-date net foreign inflow stood at $42.6 million.
That's all the news we have for this evening. Join us again tomorrow at the same time. Good night.